All the roads are winding. Welcome to the show, Lizzy Ross.
Thank you, Natalie Ross. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. So, for anyone who's not familiar with Lizzy, if you haven't gone way back into the podcast archive, almost 200 episodes now.
Wow.
Then you might not be familiar with Lizzy, but Lizzy is my sister, and she is the human with whom I originally started. We started our first podcast, Dream, Freedom, Beauty, that evolved into Earthspeak. So super cool to have you back. You left to go focus on your music, and your music is alive and doing its thing now. So sweet. Welcome back.
Thank you. It's so cool. It's so crazy to circle back together in this way. Obviously, our circles intersect continually, but I love what you've created and are creating with the community at Earthspeak, and just so many beautiful people making beautiful work together.
Thank you. Wouldn't have been possible without your magic. I mean, that's a whole another story of
I know. That is another. We should one day tell that story.
Get into that. Yes.
Yeah.
I would love to. Because I've told it from my side a few times, but I'd love to hear it from both our sides. Yeah.
Well, it's so cool because I'm like, I was about to launch into it, but I feel like you guys are really doing so much of what we set out to do. And at the time when we first started, I couldn't have envisioned how it would be possible. And I see how it has incarnated, and it's so cool. And that's come to fruition, and it's continuing to transform.
Thanks. It's amazing. Yeah. The idea came in like late July 2015. So it's almost been 6 years since it was sparked. Can you believe it?
Yeah, that's crazy.
Wow. Yeah. All right. Well, let's get to it. Who are your ancestors? As if I don't know.
I'm like, you can tell me who my ancestors are. This is actually funny because you did ancestry, some research recently, and I was like, Natalie, just like send me that link. Let me look at that.
Hitch a ride on that DNA test.
I hitched a ride on your DNA test, and so we have a lot of Scots Celtic in us, and a lot of Danish, and just British, really more northwestern Europe.
Basically, that's everything.
Yeah. Am I right there?
Yes, you're right.
Yeah.
We're like Vikings and Celtic people.
Yeah. Our last name is Ross. It's Scottish, from the town of Inverness. And that is actually something I want to bookmark, because the myth of this album that we're working on, the myth of the Selkie, is a deeply Scottish tale.
Ooh.
But we can find our way back to that.
We are going to find our way back. That way is going to find us. Mm-hmm. Okay, so where in the world do you live, and who are the people of that land?
I call it Chapel Hillsborough. We are in Chapel
Hill. I love that.
You know,
Why
I love
did I never hear that before?
I don't know. The world's been waiting. We live just north of Chapel Hill, just south of Hillsborough, and we live in this little, this road that you turn. It's it's an old highway, and you turn onto our gravel road, and this meadow opens up, and it's like this secret, a secret meadow. And so we live in the woods way back down that road. And I'm dog sitting today. I have Artemis here with me, and we've got some chickens, and I love this land so much. And the original people of this land are the Enough, the Lumbee, and the Shakori people. And we've got the beautiful Enough River that flows through Hillsborough and gives us so much nourishment, especially in the summertime. And lots of beautiful living tradition in the land here.
It is a magical spot. I remember the last time I visited you right before I moved to California, and I was driving out, and I just paused at the end of your driveway to listen to the night insects, the cicadas and crickets, and see the stars, and it was just so lovely. Such a beautiful spot to be.
Thank you. Come back anytime.
I know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Working on it. Working on it. So there's so much. We can talk for hours, and I guess I'm just gonna stay focused.
Yeah. Stay
Okay.
focused.
I'm gonna
You got
focus.
this.
Focus.
Focus up.
So I really do want to hear about this. Is something we don't really talk about a lot when we hang out one-on-one. So
Yeah.
I think this would be cool to hear about is your songwriting process. Like I'll give a little context for anyone. You've basically been a musician since you were conceived, and like, your whole freaking life. I'm 4 years older, so I get to hear all the sounds, all the humming, all the everything.
Sounds.
But like it evolved into like you are a singer and a songwriter, and you also play many instruments and you co-create music. Okay, let's start here. Who's your band and who do you co-create?
Good question. Yes, the name of my band is Violet Bell. And my not the Violent Bills, Violet Bell, like purple thing that rings. And my partner Omar Ruiz Lopez is my partner in life and my partner in music. And we perform as a duo, and we also play in configurations up to a 5-piece band. So depending on where we're going and what we're doing, we might be doing a acoustic kind of thing, or we might be doing, keyboards, drum set, upright bass. I play the guitar and the banjo, and I sing. But my voice is really my primary instrument because there's no intermediary. I don't have to process anything through an instrument to express it. It's just here in my body. And Omar plays like everything with strings, except for the bass. But if he gave him a bass, he would play it too. So yeah, I've actually heard it. So yeah, does that answer your question?
Complete question.
Okay.
A+.
Thank you. Ding, ding, ding.
Yes. Okay, great. Thanks. And hi, Omar, because I know you're finally listening. Hi.
Yeah.
So your voice is such a medium, and tell us just about your relationship with it. It's something that I'm 37 and I'm only just now like doing voice exercises on YouTube. I'm like, wow, it's really cool to like feel your voice in your body. So like, I'd love to hear, you have such an intimate and skilled relationship with your voice. What does your voice want to say about it? So,
oh, that's so crazy. It's so meta, Nat. I love
also to anyone listening, we're both Aquarius, so sorry, not sorry.
Yeah, like welcome to outer space, y'all. Aquarius with Pisces moon right here. Take you to the ocean.
Oh my gosh, awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, keep going.
So my voice, I love that. What does my voice want to say about itself? I am so grateful. I feel like it's part of my karma in this life that I was born loving to sing, and I don't know why. But singing is fundamentally breathing and vibrating. And it's becoming a chamber for that breath, that movement, that vibration. And in that space, I find so much release. Like my whole body is covered in goosebumps just talking about it. It's sacred and it's accessible to everyone. And I remember being a kid and like, The Little Mermaid was my jam.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Ariel was like where it's at. And I remember seeing those archetypes of like the pretty princess who can sing everywhere in our culture. And seeing the stage archetypes of we were in New York City. Our dad was in New York City. We went to see Cats when we were how old?
Little.
And I remember like memory all alone in the moonlight. You probably remember me singing that about 9,000 times after we saw Cats, right? And I so wanted to be good enough. And so I had this early acquaintance with that, seeking to achieve some external benchmark and become worthy through the voice. And my journey with my voice has transformed a lot over the course of my life. And I feel like it has become liberated in so many ways from the burden of worthiness. and it's become a space for free expression and so much joy and feeling. I think all of us are deeply feeling beings. I know I am. And through this breathing and this vibrating, singing and voicing, I feel such catharsis and such processing. And it's a great gift to be able to move in that in this life. And I believe that exists for everyone.
Mm. And what do people reflect back to you about their experience of hearing you sing?
People say really nice things. And it's funny because it runs the gamut of like, like I really don't identify with like the pretty princess who can sing. I feel,
Tell us what you do. Yeah, I'm like, what do you identify?
I actually, there's a line in this album where this album tells the story of all these different characters. So throughout the album, different characters are speaking in different songs. And the Selkie, this mythical woman seal, this line actually came from me in a therapy session talking with my therapist. It came out of my mouth and I was like, I am a wolf, not a woman. And I was like, well, I'll just put that in a song. And, I definitely identify with the dirt. I identify with nature and with the beautiful scorpionic spectrum of humanity. I use she, her pronouns, but I don't feel like the traditional cis female identity that is supplied in our culture, like inside the dominant culture, is big enough for who I can only speak for myself, but for who I am. And that's not to say that if anyone does identify with it, that is small or anything less. I feel like we're all given this early template when we arrive on earth, and depending on what body we show up in and where we show up to whom, we're given a template for who we can be, and so many of us experience expansion beyond that.
Right, we were like, we don't fit in this template.
I don't fit that.
Yeah.
I'm not Ariel. I used to want to be Ariel, but I'm not.
You're like Princess Crunch.
Oh my God, that is correct. Thank you for my new electropop. That's gonna be the name of I've got an album that I've written and recorded already that's totally different genre, and I've been like, what am I even gonna do with this? I think it's gonna be Princess Crunch. I'll send it to you.
Okay. Princess Crunch. Yeah. Okay. So this voice, your voice really is this vessel. It's this vessel. And, since I happen to know you pretty personally, I'm going to go ahead and just ask you about your experience of being a channel and a vessel and how that comes through. Like, what is it how do you experience yourself as that creative channel and vessel?
Love that question. Let me feel into it. I experience, what I noticed is, how I was like incessantly humming.
Oh yeah.
All the time, especially when I was younger. I'm better now at like noticing when I'm making noise, but I'm still pretty noisy. And one of the things I've noticed is that I'll be going about my day and I'll be like unloading the dishwasher, doing something totally mundane. And I will realize I'm singing something that it just like kind of popped into my head, or it could be in my head, or it could be out loud. And I think that one of the first steps of songwriting that I think is accessible to a lot of people is almost like, it kind of is mindfulness, because it's noticing what's happening in your head. And we can all do that. Whether it's I'm on some kind of rant in my head about, this happened and that happened, and blah, 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 or whether I'm caught up in a blissful moment, or whether I'm singing a song and I don't even realize it. having the reflex to notice that it's happening is the first step to catch the song. And I think nourishing it, like I think of them like plants almost, so taking I feel like there are so many ideas and there's so many songs that are just floating around constantly, like looking for a receptive channel to bring them into form. And they'll keep flitting on to the next person, like if I don't have time for them. And sometimes I'll be driving down the road and it's raining and there's a semi truck and I'm like, I can't open my voice memo and record you right now. Sorry. And I just have to say a little, say a little prayer and be like, if this song is meant to come to me, it'll come back. If it's really important, it will. And if it's not, there will be another one. So there's a sense of abundance in that. It's really cool. And there's also a sense of tending. Like, what do we choose to tend to? So if this little idea is a seedling of a song, sometimes I'll experience where I take that little idea and I, to water it and put it in sunlight is simply to spend time with unfolding what's the nugget behind it, like what's the melodic or thematic inspiration. And it also can be just giving it space, because I've experienced in songwriting that there's not a linear relationship between the work and the time we put into something and what comes out of it. And I think a lot of creative work is like that. Like we need to show up for the work. And at the same time, sometimes I will show up for a song and it will be done in 20 minutes. And it feels like it's come through me like a fire hose. And then there are some songs that I have been working on and I've written so many drafts of for 4 years and they're still not done. And there's like, a pile of papers somewhere in a cabinet. So, it's a lot of flow, surrender, and like finding balance in a dynamic flow.
Nice. I like that dynamic flow. How do you know when a song is done?
Ooh, good question. So we just went to the studio to record this album. And it was so funny because these songs have been around. Like this first song that sparked this album is called Back to the Sea. And it was the first song that I wrote that has this Selkie character show up in it. If you don't know, I'm sure we'll talk about this more later, but a Selkie is a seal that can take off its skin and become human. And this album is telling the story of a Selkie. And when we first recorded that, or when I first wrote that song, it came in one night and it was like, bam, like the melody, the words, like it was all there. And that feels like a magical visitation. And I'm like, oh my God, I've been blessed. And every time there's part of me that's like, will that ever happen again? And then it happens again. Yeah, totally.
You can't make it happen.
No, it's, you can only show up and wait for the rain to fall and have your bowl to catch it. And so that song happened in that first incarnation. And then these other songs started coming and they came in really funny ways, which I'll tell you more about later if you want, because it's cool.
Yeah, tell us about them now.
Tell you about it now? Okay. So the second song, the first song, I wasn't even thinking about Selkies. Like this just came to me. And it was on an instrument that I had never really played before, the banjo. I was fiddling around. I didn't have any technical knowledge, which is one of my favorite things. Because I think like one of our big creative blocks is like, I am not trained or skilled. I don't have the technical knowledge. I'm not good enough to do this. But the reality is that sometimes when we don't have the technical knowledge or skills or training, we are free. Like we're able to be receptive to what's happening now and playful without the burden of being an expert. Training is great, but so is a beginner's mind. So I was playing with this song idea. It came out of this banjo that I never played the banjo before. And a couple months later, maybe it was like a month or two later, I remember walking in the door and Omar, my partner, was playing something on the fiddle. And I had been sort of listening for more threads of songs from that first thread of the Selkie song. And I had been working on a vocal melody. And and some words about the fisherman's daughter. So in the story of the Selkie basically gets kidnapped by a fisherman who takes her to live on land and be his wife. And they have a daughter. And so she spoke to me, and I was writing this song. I walk in the door, Omar's playing the fiddle, and I'm like, holy crap. This is like, he was playing the fiddle part for the melody that I had written and the words that I had written. And they fit together like two magical musical Legos. And that's how the second song was born. And they can be so completely different in their incarnation. And, subsequent songs, just like, some of them just come out. Some of them it's like, really got to pull hard on that thread for it to come. There was one song that Omar really didn't like, and he didn't want to work on it, and I could feel him being resistant to it. And it was kind of a gnarly song. It was like the song from the fisherman's perspective of his story of kidnapping the Selkie and sort of what overtook him and what came of it. So there was a lot of shadow in it. And in the studio, it blossomed into this. It's like, well, I think it's one of Omar's favorite tracks on the album now. So there's this continuous transformation that is happening throughout the songwriting process. And to come back to your original question, which is, how do you know when a song is done? With so many of these songs, I just didn't. I didn't know. I kept sitting with the music. Some of them I had more time for, and others not as much. There were a couple songs that we wrote very shortly before we were going to go into the studio, like, a week or two before. It was like, we got to do this one too. This one just came to me. And it is, with those songs, it's like a mixture of action and surrender. And sometimes it's just time to press record. And you're like, well, that's what this version of the song is going to be. And knowing that they have their own life, and that if they need to take another form, like they'll do that. And with the older songs that I had more time with, like that first Selkie song, I sat with it. There were lyrics that bothered me. There were places where I feel very somatically, like I could feel it in my belly. That something was like a little tweaky with this line or that line. And so I would just kind of sit down and play with it and say like, well, it could be this or it could be that. And, it could be like, sometimes it's moments like in the shower where, you're not looking at a phone, water is pouring over you. There's like a lot of physical presence. And I would sort of just turn over ideas in my mind. And ultimately, those songs that feel like patchwork where you stitch them together thread by thread, they come into a wholeness. And then there are songs that come out as like one single beautiful garment, and you're like, oh wow, that's a shirt. Great.
Cool. That's I have so many questions about it, but I think before we get into that, I think we should talk about this tale of the Selkie. You've kind of hinted at it here and there, but do you want to just tell it and tell us where you first heard about it and kind of its origins?
Yeah. This has been such a funny and cool thing, because as we play these songs, people will like come up to me back when there were shows in the before times. People would, what's a show? People would come up to me after shows and they'd be like, I love Selkies. And like, they would be like, have you ever seen The Secret of Ronin-ish? And I was like, yeah, of course. Shout out if y'all haven't seen Secret of Ronin-ish. A, it's amazing. B, that little girl's outfits are on point. She's my style inspiration. I want all of her sweaters.
Send your sweaters to Lizzy.
Send your sweaters to me. That's right. That's a great movie. I think that might have been one of the first places I heard about the story of the Selkie, because I'm pretty sure we watched it when we were kids. Do you remember that?
No, I gotta rewatch it.
Oh, you're gonna love it. Yeah. It's a Scottish story, and it is. I heard about it again in many incarnations. It floats around in our culture. There's a movie called The Song of the Sea that's also a beautiful. I think you would really love it, Nat. And there's the same people make a movie called The Book of Kells, and it's basically about the fae folk and different kinds of fairies living in the world now dominated by humans, at least in part. Anyway, this story does circulate in pop culture. And the place that I most recently connected with it was in the book Women Who Run with the Wolves, where, um, oh God, her name is escaping me right now. Dr. Amazing. Clarissa Pinkola Estes. Thank you. Yes. Dr. Estes is talking about, she calls it Sealskin Soulskin. That's the name of her version of the story. And she uses it as a really beautiful metaphor about, on many levels you could interpret it, but what speaks to me most is this story of integrating our fears, integrating the ego and the deep soulful knowing of enoughness and connection to source. And in there's so many layers to parse out, and so many things that speak to me in my telling of the story, and that I hope will offer healing to whoever hears it in their own way.
All right, you want to tell us the story?
Yeah, girl. So the story, there are lots of different Selkie stories, but the version of the Selkie story that I'm telling is about a Selkie who starts with a fisherman. He is a really lonely guy, and he is not an evil person, but he is deeply, deeply lonely. And every day he goes out in his boat and he goes and he fishes and he comes back in and he, brings up his catch and he guts his catch and he lights the fire and he hangs up his clothes to dry and he falls asleep and he wakes up and he does it again over and over and over and over. And one day he's out on the water and he lives on the edges of, beyond town, so he doesn't really see anyone very very much at all unless he's going into town to sell his fish. One day he's out on the water and it's getting dark and he knows that he should turn back, but a fog falls on the water and he's kind of a little bit lost, which is strange for him because he's spent every day of his working life out on these waters. He knows them really well, but the sea can be wily like that. So he finds himself in the fog as the darkness is falling. And he hears voices and he figures, okay, I'll head for the voices because that's going to be where people are and that's going to be land and safety. And he paddles through the fog. It's a kind of fog that you put your hand out and you can't even see it in front of you. He's paddling, and he approaches these voices and he realizes that it's not speaking, it's actually people singing. And as he gets closer, he sees the mist part, and in front of him there's this big rock rising out of the ocean. And on that rock, he can just see the silhouettes of bodies swaying and singing and dancing. And he catches the glint of the moon on those bodies. And in the story, it's a full moon night. So he realizes they're not just any old bodies. There are naked lady bodies on a rock in the middle of the ocean at night. And he's like, what's going on? And he pulls his oars up out of the water because he realizes something is not normal here. It's not part of his normal world. And he stays very silent. And he watches and he waits and he remembers a story his mom told him when he was little. And the story was of these sea creatures, Selkies. They're seals, but they can take off their skin. They can become human. And they are beautiful. And if you get a Selkie's skin while they're not wearing it, you can control that Selkie. And he had heard stories about men who had taken the skins of Selkies and had them come on land to be their brides. And he thought, oh my God, this is like my chance. This is my chance. And so he's sitting there in the shadow of this big rock and kind of just trying to be as quiet as he can. And slowly, one by one, the Selkies put their skins back on. I almost imagine them like zipping their skins up and jumping back into the water until there's one Selkie left. But the fisherman, while they were dancing, had snuck up onto the rock and he had snatched her skin. And he was just waiting for her to realize it and to come find him. And she did. She crawled over the rock. She saw him. She saw her skin in his hands. and she knew what had happened. And she begged him to give her back her skin. But the fisherman was just overtaken by his ego, overtaken by his fear and his loneliness. And he could not hear her. He could only hear the voice of that loneliness and the voice of that desire and that power. So he said, come live with me on land for 7 years and I'll give you back your skin. So the Selkie got in the boat and they made their way back to the land, back to his cabin. And she had never really been more inland than standing on a beach naked on a full moon night. So I imagine her walking on blades of grass and feeling them between her toes for the first time, and, you know, opening the door to their little one-room thatch and stone cottage and smelling smoke, you know, smelling cooked fish. That was never something she had eaten before. And she stepped into this world that was not her world, the world of land. And she, in this moment of blissful dancing, had been robbed of her skin, her freedom, her ability to move about in the great cosmic ocean that she called home. So the fisherman and the Selkie lived together, and 7 years came and went, and they had a daughter who didn't know she was half Selkie, and she just knew that she was, you know, a little different. She felt a little strange. There was something about her, and people in the village knew it too. And she was just little. She was probably about 3 or 4 years old. When the Selkie, after 7 years, it became clear that she was either going to die or go back to the sea. She was drying up, like chunks of hair were falling out. Her skin was flaking off in big sheets, and she was withering. All that, like, sumptuous Selkie beauty, the plumpness of the sea, all of that had atrophied on land. And she came to the fisherman and she said, hey, it's been 7 years. I'm dying, and you told me you would give me back my skin, and it's time. But the truth is that the fisherman had, on their very first night after he had brought the Selkie back, he had taken her skin and he had tied it to a stone. He had lashed it to the biggest stone he could push, off of the tallest cliff he could push it off of, into the thrashing waves, because he never wanted her to leave. And he thought, if I don't have her skin, I can't give it back. And by the end of 7 years, she's going to love me, and it's going to be great, and never leave me. So the fisherman knew that she was dying, and he knew that she needed to get her skin back, but there was nothing he could do about it because he had already betrayed her out of that fear and that loneliness. But one night, after they had put their little half Selkie girl to bed, the fisherman and the Selkie were off doing whatever they do, and the little girl was laying in bed. She's like, you know, barefoot, staring up at the ceiling. It's like probably a 2-room cottage at this point, dirt floor. And she hears something coming in through the open window. And she doesn't know what it is, but she knows that she loves it. And she, without even realizing it, in that kind of toddler way, like, gets up to follow it. And her little bare feet take her down through the door, out down the path to the ocean. And she's standing on the beach, and she sees this silver puddle of something in the sand. She doesn't know what it is, but she loves it. And she runs for it, and she reaches, she grabs it, picks it up to touch it, and it's just like all of the goodness she can feel radiating from this mysterious and beautiful thing. So the first thing she does is she runs home to show her mom. She's so excited. Like a cat with a mouse. She's like, look what I found for you. And you know what it is. It's her mother's skin. So the Selkie has this choice. She can stay on land and she can die. Or she can put her skin back, go back to the sea, and leave behind her child and her life on land and the fisherman. And it's not really much of a choice, you know? So she decides, all right, if I'm going to be here in any kind of way, it's going to be in in my skin in the ocean, and this is what I'll do. And she puts her skin on that night, and she sneaks out and she goes back to the sea without even saying goodbye to the fisherman. She knows she can't, otherwise he'll try to stop her. And the fisherman's daughter grows up. The fisherman, like I said, I don't admire his actions, but I can relate to the loneliness and the fear. He's not an evil person. He has a lot of time afterwards to think about what he did and why. And their daughter grows up, and you can see her sometimes sitting out on the rocks in the ocean, talking to the seals and talking to this one big, beautiful, black-eyed seal that comes up to sit with her. And she has a relationship with the land and with the sea that integrates both of those ways of living and being. And her path, her prescribed path, is to, grow up and do something like her father. She can't be a fisherman, but she can weave nets, she can get a job in town. That's not what she does. She reminds me of our grandmother, Momo, who our parents wanted to be her parents, our great-grandparents wanted to be a postal clerk. And Momo instead went and got a nursing degree and went aboard a hospital ship that traveled the world. The fisherman's daughter takes off on her own journey, and that's where our story ends for now.
Wow, thanks for telling that.
My pleasure.
All right, so let's unpack it a little bit.
Yeah.
So many different kind of subtexts and meanings for you, and just which ones, where does this really strike you? What moves you about it, and why?
Yeah. I feel like there's such an initial desire or impulse to cut the fisherman out of the picture and name him as evil. And in some ways his actions are, they have some clear malice in them. But I also feel like the truth is that I relate, and I have to be honest about the fear and loneliness that sometimes, parts of me, and in this story, we can talk about it as the ego. I know people have a bunch of different names for that. I'm curious, like, do you relate to the term ego, or do you?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. If any other names for it come to you, I would be totally curious and receptive.
Like
to
the
hear.
analytical mind.
Yeah, because monkey mind, analytical, totally, because it happens in this context of like, it's not grounded in the cosmic source. There will never be enough because the analytical mind doesn't have that rooted connection to love in the same way that other parts of us do. And so I see the fisherman, and I see that not so much as something to be cut off and blamed, destroyed, othered, made evil, but more something to be noticed and to become curious about and to be integrated. And I think you can peel these characters apart and make them archetypes of individuals in our culture, or you can push them together and make them archetypes of one being. I believe like the Selkie and the fisherman and their daughter and the ocean all exist inside of all of us in one way or another. We all know the voice of fear. We all know the hand that would reach for the Selkie's skin. And we also all know the depth of what it feels like to really be held by a sense of cosmic love, that oceanic force of infinite abundance and love. And we all know the fisherman's daughter-ness of like, between liminality. I feel like especially the Earthspeak folks who resonate with Earthspeak probably have some kind of experience with liminality, moving between worlds, the sense of going from a meeting at whatever job you're working at, and then going out to have a meeting with a tree. And whatever it is for you, there's so many ways it can manifest. For me and you, we traveled between two families as children. Like we've grown up in a deeply liminal space forever. And the Selkie herself is like the character with whom I most relate. Partially, I mean, obviously, like, who doesn't want to relate to a magical fae seal goddess creature? Like, duh. She's got some Princess Crunch energy in her. She's like, this to me is like the creative soul. You can zoom out or zoom in. And if I zoom in and I think of it in the context of femininity, it is like a more raw, wild, and complete sense of femininity that our culture prescribes for people in female bodies. And it is the raw, wild freedom to be, to access all the parts of ourselves, not just the shiny, beautiful surface princess, but the deep, deep, dark waters and the fruit of those places in our hearts, souls, bodies, experience.
Mm. And with this kind of like, where do you see the Selkie story taking place in your life? Like, have you been kind of kidnapped and then had to choose between worlds?
Totally. I mean, I could like, girl, we could talk for a long time. How much? Yeah. But I think the one place that I feel it, and I think that probably a lot of people can relate, whether they identify as female or not, is like as a child, I felt more, I'll tell it from the perspective of my experience in a female body. But I want to say to anyone who doesn't identify as female that I don't feel like this is not an exclusively female experience. So interpret it as it works for you, if it works for you. I remember being a girl and being my own feral wild being. Obviously, I still had to get up and go to school in the morning, and somebody was feeding me and giving me, thanks, Mom, I love you. And
Thanks, Jay.
yeah, thanks, Jay. And
Also, thanks, Dad and Elizabeth.
yes, thank you all. We love you. So obviously, I'm not literal with feral wild being, but the sense that when I was a girl, no one was looking at me in the same way as when I started to become a quote unquote woman. And this experience of growing into becoming old enough to be sexualized in a culture, and having this new awareness of myself as being sexualized by other people, it took my experience away from the internal presence with myself and embodied presence with the world around me, and it put my awareness outside of my body. I think it was like one of the early steps of sort of dissociation and trauma, of starting to look at myself from the outside and compare my body to other bodies and evaluate my body for these qualities that I was told were desirable, things that I should be, things that I should do. That was one of the first times I felt like my skin was taken away from me. And successive times, I may have gotten it back in inches or miles at different times in my life. And I can remember feeling the sense of reconnection. Like, I can remember times after a breakup that I was like, oh my God, I've like recovered this whole part of myself that I just like sublimated, I just buried in order to accommodate this relationship or to perform for this relationship. Or and it's not just romantic relationships, there are plenty of relationships that we perform for like that. But the sense of freedom and liberation after that, and remembering that I could reconnect with that source that is present everywhere, all around, all the time, part of me and part of the world, was the sense of recovering my skin. And as I continue to grow and get older and just keep learning and being alive, I see it. I feel like I'm getting better at keeping my skin on, but I am also, I'm just learning. There are times when especially when I've let people really cross or destroy boundaries that I didn't know I needed to keep me safe, um, or to keep me in healthy relationship with myself and the world, whatever safe means. That was like a learning experience. And when I got my skin back from after that, I had grown so many layers of knowledge, like a tree with more rings. And it was painful and very fruitful.
Hmm. Cool.
Yeah.
Painful and fruitful.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that, like the paradox of both of those existing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like when we feel a lot of these kinds of pain, I don't mean it in the context of like self-harming, like let's go feel some pain, but I mean it in the context of, what ails me is a space where if I can turn my attention there or bring that pain into the light, whether it's shame, guilt, fear, regret, there's so many different species of these feelings. If I can bring those things into some kind of light of even simply witnessing them without judging them, um, and even if I can find a little space to accommodate them and like instead of trying to cut that part of me off and out, but trying to give it space to be, maybe it's even possible to extend some love to it. And that's when I start to see those things transform in myself. And they turn into this wisdom and ability to be more present in life and love more deeply, whether it's another person or myself.
I guess what I'm hearing you say is that when you're able to look at those parts of you that you've either rejected for one,
Yes.
or you couldn't possibly be that, like it's too good for you to be that,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but it's too ugly and you reject it, repulsed,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that when you look at those and accept them and, accept yourself as those, then you're able to see and accept others in the world and
Yeah.
with more grace.
Yeah. And I can, it's almost like I can afford more bandwidth instead of like spending so much energy uh trying to keep these things at bay. I can like let down that defense and I can afford to be present in the world.
Yeah. So much energy gets unlocked when we stop trying to just like keep that which isn't it, which we've othered, keep it
Yeah.
over there. Just
Yeah,
stay over there.
and that's like the juicy, that is like, those are the diamonds, man.
I agree. That's for sure. And I want to hear more. I don't know. I know you had thoughts on this. So tell us more of your thoughts on this, on the othering and integrating and the
Yeah.
creative process tied up with all of that.
Yeah. And there's one thing I also want to add to I want to speak to the mamas out there, like motherhood and how our culture. I've never given birth. I am a stepmom, and it's so mind-blowing. Like, I'm also a stepchild, and my stepchild and I have really, in a lot of ways, really similar stories. So it's like a very juicy experience for me to be living. Um, but I look at the ancestral lineage of my mothers and grandmothers, and I look at the women around me in motherhood, and I think about how in some ways the becoming a mother can sometimes feel like losing your skin and gaining, there's like this is deeply different and personal in every experience, but I think there's a reason that the Selkie is on land for 7 years. And it's like, that's about the amount of time you need to like conceive and give birth to and keep a little person alive before they can start to like merely pour their own bowl of cereal, you know? Like there's, and I think that so many, the depth and the complexity of what motherhood is so often unacknowledged in our culture. Like it's not a bouquet of flowers on Mother's Day, and it's not like perfection. It's like this gritty, deep, complex, wild thing. And so I just want to say, like, speak to the mamas.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely hear, and in that Selkie method, I mean, it's right out, like, that's the myth is literally motherhood as well.
Yeah.
So thanks
Yeah.
just for speaking to that, and parenthood. I mean, I think we can expand it to parenthood. Like,
Yeah.
of course, people in female bodies go through a much different transition than someone in a male body having a child, but there's still a death and a rebirth that happens for anyone who's becoming a parent. And
Yeah.
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 And then interesting, I wonder, that point, I myself am not a parent in any child capacity, though I feel like a mother to many creative beings and things. Um, it's interesting being 37 and not being a mother, but having that like mothering still. It's cool. But
Yeah.
the I'm curious about you said 7 years is about enough for the child to kind of be able to kind of fend for itself a little bit.
Yeah.
And I wonder what happens for parents at that age of, okay, their child's like 6 years old, 6 or 7 years old now. And is there like a kind of break that now that parent can kind of reclaim something of themselves again? Because, 7 years is a long time to be just kind of focused on taking care of this being, keeping it
Yeah.
alive.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have any experience from, like raising Odin, your stepchild.
Yeah.
Um, it's different than being his like physical mother, but
Mhm.
or feel what you've witnessed in Omar and his birth mom as well.
That's a really good question. And it's funny you were saying, and I realized that Odin started to read voraciously, like somewhere between 6 and 7. And it was like a switch had flipped in our lives, because like he all of a sudden was sitting and quietly occupying himself for hours and just like reading and just totally into whatever he was reading. And it was a complete change of pace from the level of like physical and verbal interaction and just taking care and entertaining. And so that is, I think, like, when a kid learns to read, if they love to read, there's like a big thing that happens. All of a sudden we had so much more bandwidth. And now he's 8 and he's getting bigger, and he's already a really big kid, like, for his age. And we can see, and it's like, yeah, and it's like really bittersweet, because it's like, oh my God, he's like getting so big, and and we have to remember, it's such a cliche, but it's so true. We have to remember to like enjoy this while it lasts. And not to say, nobody knows what's coming next, but just to like savor the sweetness of 8. Like 8 is great, and
He'll never be 8 again.
he'll never be 8 again. Yeah. And it's so funny. It's so funny what he knows and what he doesn't know. And like, yeah, he's such a little goober. Yeah.
It's been interesting watching too, because he looks so much older than he is.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're like, wait, no, he's 8.
Yeah.
Like he's like a kid.
Oh my God. It can be so easy to forget. And especially like this pandemic year, he's been hanging out with me and Omar. Like he's like hanging out with adults all the time. So he talks like a little 20-year-old, and it's like, I got to remember just to make sure that there's plenty of space for Legos and
Not knowing.
and the sweetness and the innocence, Yeah. There's so much in there, girl. That is a whole nother. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I know. Oh, go ahead.
Kind of is a doorway into one thing you had asked me, and I didn't really answer, was about like creativity and otherness, and like, remind me exactly what the question was.
Well, I think I'm wanting to talk about that. I think you mentioned something earlier about becoming, what was it, liberated from the burden of shame, of
Yeah.
creative shame? No, the burden
Yeah.
of worthiness. Sorry, it was
Oh
becoming liberated from
yeah.
the burden of wordiness, burden of worthiness. I can't freaking.
I love it. Liberated from the burden of worthiness,
Thank
or
you.
the burden of birthiness.
Blah, blah, blah.
Blah, blah.
So yeah, and there's that worthiness, and with worthiness comes shame, and just like this creative shame, and just coming, I see in our society and in myself even, um so much pressure put on creative expression, even put on personal, authentic, honest expression, much less like creating something and sharing it with the world. And there's so much fear and shame and unworthiness. And I think I just love to hear some of your experience with that, and where have you felt that, and how has that transmuted in your life?
Yeah, great question. And this is such a juicy onion. There's so many layers to this. And let's chop it up and fry it, girl. Who wants some onion rings? I think that maybe I'll go backwards in time and I'll think about what's happening now. So we just recorded this album in the studio. We did it live and it was amazing. And it was in the studio where I recorded my first ever album. And my experience, it was so crazy to be back in that studio because my experience was so radically different. And when I recorded my first album, I was coming to it with this pressure and also like this pressure to be something I'm not, to fit into this sort of, blonde country girl singer archetype. And I'm Princess Crunch. And I'm not that. And also this illusion of what music is for. So, I knew that I had this deeply powerful attraction to music, but I didn't feel, I think I probably felt the soul work of it on some level, but everyone says that, music is like for fame and to be sexy and cool and rich and all these things, rock star, like all these words we use around music and the commercialized music culture. So
Right. And like, if you're a musician, if like music comes through you, there's kind of this vision sold to you of like, okay, make it big.
Oh yeah, totally. Oh, you gonna make it? Yeah, man. There's this whole dichotomy of failure. Did you make it or did you sell out and get a real job? There's like,
or did you sell out and you made it too much? Like
totally.
there's like, stay in the sweet spot where you've made it, but not too much.
Absolutely. It reminds me of, it's like those dichotomies that there's actually no room in, the virgin whore or the sellout artist. There's no real safe space if we let those external measurements be the measurement of our worthiness. And so when I went to the studio that first time, I had all these ideas about what I had to be and do and what was going to come out of that album and all these things. And it was the first time, I think for most people, the first time they go into a recording studio and make an album is, it's like looking in the mirror for the first time and being like, whoa, man, I should like maybe brush my hair every once a week or something. Like you see this sonic reflection that is not, if you've never recorded yourself before, you may never have really heard yourself in that way. And coming back into the studio after 10 years of playing live and recording and making different albums, we came into the same space. It was the first time I had been set foot in that studio since I had made that first album. The only reason we were recording in that studio is because of COVID. And, it was open and it was accessible and local. And I was in the studio to record this album that I wrote from a completely different place. Instead of from a place of trying to be something or prove something, be someone, fit a mold, hit a mark, I wrote this from a channeled deep soul compulsion. This music came from me and something bigger than me. And it came for me and to serve whoever it's going to serve when they hear it. And to be in that space with Omar, my partner, the two of us have cultivated this creative relationship, and to be there with the other musicians who were there. I want to say their names because I love them and I'm so grateful to them. Tatiana Hargreaves on the fiddle, Joseph Terrell of Mipso on the guitar, Sinclair Palmer on the bass, Austin McCall on the drums. And we're going to be doing some more recording, so that list will grow. But it was such a beautiful, juicy moment of like, oh my God, look at, like I'm not on the top of the pops anywhere, right? Like I have that target has completely left my assessment of like success or who I am as a person or musically or as an artist. But to see these relationships and to play and feel this music live together was so nourishing, and it felt like the gift of many years in service to music. And so it was just like a paradigm shift, it went from being something where I went from being really outcome oriented to being more process oriented. And the process is what saved me from thinking too much about what other people think. And it's still, I think that almost anyone out there, if you're listening and you're a creative or an artist, you probably know that that may never really go away. Like for me, there are times when I'll like fire up Instagram or something and I'll see somebody's post and I'll be like, oh man, they're so cool. I wish I could be that cool. And like, oh, there's like, they're playing that thing, that big show thing. I really wish I want to play that thing. I must not be good enough. There's like absolutely those it's like chutes and ladders. Like those little slides still exist in my mind, but they don't have the hold over me that they once did. I feel more free to be in the process and just grateful to get to be a steward of this music, and grateful to have the experience of vibrating and breathing and making sound with these other people, whether it's the musicians, the audience, or the source that comes through us all.
So what do you think, it's been 10 years, you said, since you last stepped foot in that studio?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. So 10 years will do a lot,
Yeah.
and like you're going from 20s to 30s. There's so much happening.
Yeah.
But was there anything in that process of 10 years that you feel really helped you be liberated from that pressure?
So many things. I think that the first thing I can think of is like being a girl, and again coming into the awareness of like, oh, I have this body and this culture commodifies my body and they commodify my hair and my eyes and my face, and I'm being told that these parts of me are what's valuable and worthy and that I need to capitalize on them while they last. And I think that one way or another I came into a community. So much of it is like through probably witnessing you and having you in my life and having a dialogue where there was space to explore these things. And as you, Natalie, would sort of like breach the edges of whatever new conscious territory you were expanding into about who you were allowed to be, and that would bring little glimmers of that back into my world, and so you created this field of expanding permission, and I am thanking you for all of the lifetimes for that, for forever and ever. And I think that and it also came through a lot of other friendships, a lot of connecting with, I think of my friends, my friend Victoria, who was one of my first, we were roommates in college, and she was, we grew up, I went to Catholic school, like it was a pretty intensely heteronormative life for the first 18 years. And Victoria was one of my first friends who like really gave me permission to feel into the not cisness of my being. And other friendships, Grace, another friend who kind of gave me permission to feel back into that feralness and to lean into the parts of myself that our culture may not see or value, and to breathe life back into them. And it's been a really interesting 10 years of like working through, being a female band leader in a field that's mostly dominated by men. And everybody's doing the best they can. And sometimes it's really not very good. And, that's taught me a lot. And I have a lot to learn still. But I think getting to know that it's okay to say no. It's okay to have a boundary. I don't always have to smile and laugh something off. And, some of the things that gave me permission to have that boundary were deeply, deeply traumatic experiences. And it was like, it was the losing of the skin and the regaining of the skin, in that sense of like something plutonic. It took me into the underworld. It transformed me, and I came out with new powers. And I think that happens for so many of us. Yeah. What else? What gave me permission to have that creative freedom? I've done a lot of drugs. And I'm sober now. I've been sober for almost a little less than 2 years. And it's a dynamic thing. I'm in active relationship with the part of me that identifies as an addict. And I think that it's a mixed blessing in some ways to have that obsessive streak and to feel life in that way, and then to have the circumstances of life that drew me into all the experimentation. Some experiments ended better than others. There were some experiments that I think did contribute to me gaining a sense of freedom. And ultimately I found freedom when I realized that my relationship with substances had shifted, and it was no longer serving me. It was no longer honoring the medicine of those substances. And that the next evolution of freedom was to step into being present with my own consciousness as it is, unmediated by any kind of substance. But yeah, that I couldn't answer that question without also like sharing that bit of truth with you.
Totally.
Yeah.
Rad. Well, there's so much there. Yeah, I really like that plutonic journey. I feel like that's something that that's something a lot of people resonate with too, is like they don't even know why they find themselves in the underworld. They just are. And they're like,
Yeah.
What's happening? How did I even it's like Alice in Wonderland. You just fall down the rabbit hole.
Totally.
And you're like, whoa.
Yeah. Well, it's like the Selkie didn't realize she had lost her skin. Like she was dancing on a rock in the moonlight, and then all of a sudden she was like, "Oh my god!"
Right? She didn't do anything to deserve it.
Yeah,
it just like happened.
Absolutely. It's not. I don't think that it's not a punishment. There's such a desire to narrate these things. I think it's just part of a soul journey.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
I agree. So you've recently kind of, I don't know even how to describe it, like stirred the soup of the stories and the fears of success, fears of failure, with doing a Kickstarter to fund your album, because making music ain't cheap.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'd love to hear a little bit about like you know, what has come up in the process of doing a Kickstarter.
Yes. Um, Stirring the soup is a really good metaphor for that. Um, it was so a Kickstarter sounds totally mundane, right? It's like, oh my gosh, you're gonna do a fundraiser. Okay. For me, preparing to do a Kickstarter was one of the scariest things I've ever done. And it's it came about because in the last year we haven't been able to tour. So Omar and I are partners in music and in life. And so neither one of us has been able to do our full-time job of touring and playing music. And so that means that we don't have the income that we use to go into the studios, so we can pay for the studio time, pay the musicians, and like value everybody's work, make the stuff. And we still love to make music so much, and these songs came to us, and we needed to let them incarnate. And so even though there was no logical to my logical mind, it was impossible. It's like in order to do XYZ, you have to have this. And you don't have that, so you can't do it. Until a friend opened up the possibility of like, hey, you've been cultivating this community. These people want to hear your music, this music as a service, and you make this music because you love it. And people listen to it because they love it. And we listen to it because it connects us. It brings us together. It helps us feel our oneness, helps us feel our feelings. How about you do a Kickstarter? And so, we said, okay, we're going to take that leap and we're going to do it. And it's so scary to ask for help. It's so scary to embrace the possibility of failure. Kickstarter is all or nothing. So you set a goal, and if you don't make your goal, you don't get any money. It's not like you can raise part of it. It's like all or nothing. You fail publicly. So the possibility of public failure, public rejection, and the voices in my head that even after, a lifetime of being creative and in many media and 10 years of playing music, getting up on stage in front of people and spilling my guts, still like the fear that actually nobody really loves my music. Nobody really wants to hear this. Nobody cares. Nobody cares. That was a powerful fear. And, I turned over these rocks in my heart and my guts, and I saw what was beneath them. And the voices of these fears were not as loud as they had been when I was younger, but they were still pretty compelling. And yet the voice of like the desire to try, the desire to like take the next step on the path, let the energy continue to evolve, embrace this risk and see what happens, embrace the possibility of failure, because to try is not to fail, even if it looks like failure. To be bold enough to take the chance is a success. And with the support, reflection, and love of many, many people, Natalie included, we launched our first ever Kickstarter. And within like 2 hours, it was, like 10% funded.
I
And
think
it was,
even before your official launch.
yeah, even before our official launch. And right now our goal is $20,000, which is scary because one of my other fears was like, who are you to ask? And what do you think you're doing? Like, how are you even allowed to have fear of receiving? But the truth is, to pay for studio time, to pay musicians, to pay for the rewards that we're creating for people, because we're creating really cool and beautiful stuff for people who back our project. That's what we needed. So it has been a wild process to dance, like slow dance with those fears, and just look right into each other's eyes, and then press that launch button and see our community just come forth and show up for us in this beautiful way that I had not dared to dream was possible.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I imagine it's like what's going on in you with like the worthiness around getting paid for your art.
Yeah. It's cool because it's like, so on Kickstarter, whenever someone backs our project, um, they're choosing a reward level. So, like, for instance, if you give a certain amount of money, I am an artist and a visual artist. I make lino cut prints. I draw and carve them by hand and then print them. And I'm making a big, beautiful 11 by 17 Selkie print that is one of the rewards. And there's been a amazing amount of demand for that, which has been so cool. I'm
It
so,
is so
yeah.
cool.
It's like to see the level of demand. I make
Well,
other
I'm saying
things.
your print is so cool.
Oh, thanks, Nat.
Yeah.
I've always loved to make visual art, but I've never really tried to sell it. And I've always been, my energy sort of shifted more towards music because it's such an all consuming profession. And so to realize that, I've actually been cultivating these currencies all along. Like, the value of this love, these relationships, this music, this community, the art that I make, people really do want to see it. They want to see it get made, and it brings them healing and it brings them uh, joy. And that feels like just a door opening to tremendous possibilities that, again, like, I had not dared to dream were possible. Because I wonder how many creatives listening out there relate to this. I so love to create, and I've trained myself to reserve expectations about how things will be received and to really focus on the process. And so when things are received in such a way, when people really show up and they're like, this is amazing, I want this, I love this, it's just like extra, you know? Yeah.
I totally get that. I totally get
Yeah.
that. Amazing. Well, I love your art. I love it, but I'll declare publicly. I love it. And your
Thanks,
music and
Nat.
you, of course.
I
I
love
love you.
you. I love your art. I'm so
Thanks.
excited that you're singing and you're exploring your voice.
It's fun. I haven't done it this week, I confess, but
It's okay.
it's fun. It's really fun to just feel that sound come out of you and be like, I was like, whoa, I can be really loud. And John
Yes,
was
you
like, whoa, you can be
can.
really loud. I was like,
Girl.
this feels good.
Yeah. Man, I believe it. I believe you have some unknown depths and heights inside of you in that voice.
Don't we all? Don't we all?
Yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy.
It's amazing. So where can people go to support you, to support your Kickstarter? And when does the Kickstarter close? Because you said it's all or nothing. But then once you reach it, so like if you don't reach your goal, you don't get anything.
Yeah.
But when you do reach your goal, you can go over the goal and there's the sky's the limit. So where can they go? And yeah.
People can go to violetbell.net. The name of my band is Violet Bell. And go to violetbell.net and it'll take you to a link to our Kickstarter, or you can go to the podcast link, the show notes for this.
Oh yeah, we'll have it in the show notes,
right?
Of course.
And you can also find us, it'll be the first link up on Facebook, Instagram. We're at Violet Bell Music on Instagram. And we're going to be running it through 11:59 p.m. on Thursday, May 13th. So you have like a little less than 2 weeks left to go. Take a look.
By the time this goes live, it'll be about a week, I think.
Oh my God, you better get on your computer right now. Yeah, we've got a lot of super cool stuff I'm excited about. We're making limited edition vinyl and lots of beautiful artwork. And we even have a dear friend who volunteered her condo in Breckenridge on a mountainside to be one of our, yeah. So you can find that Facebook, Instagram, Violet Bell. Check it out. And I want to express my deep, deep gratitude to everyone who has already contributed. It's so wild to scroll through the list of backers and see people's names and feel each of those people, just to know that they love what we're doing and want to support it and they want it to continue and they find value in it. And it's so, so sweet. Thank you.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, y'all, and then people can listen to, you have all kinds of music that you've already produced and they can go check it
Mhm.
out.
We're on
Where's the best place for them to find that? Spotify?
Well, yeah, I think for artists, the best place is always Bandcamp if you want the artist to get paid the best, but we're on every streaming service. I know that like a lot of things are more convenient on a streaming service. So you can find Violet Bell on Spotify, you can find Violet Bell on Apple Music, you can find Violet Bell on Tidal. Pretty much anywhere you stream, you can find Violet Bell.
And you can find, if you look Lizzy Ross on Spotify, you get your old tracks too, which you got some goodies in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sweet. Right.
Yes.
Well, and then people can get on your mailing list at lizzy.net or is it violetbell.net?
Either one, lizzy.net or violetbell.net. You can get on our mailing list. You can hear about our latest happenings and creations. We're going to be doing, this might be after, on May 11th, we're doing a live stream with the North Carolina Museum of Art that will be a really beautiful live performance at 9 p.m. Eastern time. So, if you want to hear about stuff like that, you can find out on our mailing list.
Radical.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Lizzy, for coming on and
thanks, Natty.
Chatting. And
oh my God, my pleasure.
Yeah, totally.
Thank you. I love you. You're amazing.
I love you. You're amazing. Thank you. All the roads are winding. Listen to over 200 free Earthspeak podcast episodes on your favorite podcast app and visit earthspeak.love to learn about our collective community and workshops.